national rate of $1.46 billion a day since 2006. Now with electronic banking, wire transfers, and credit cards, people have less physical custody of their money. As of right now, the amount of money in circulation is not able to cover the national debt. This was carefully planned since the inception of the Federal Reserve Bank.
What is the proper relationship, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. So long as that is in place and there is no evidence that the administration or the Congress or anybody else is requesting that we do things other than what we think is the appropriate thing, then what the relationships are don't frankly matter. And I've had very good relationships with presidents.
And the next planned step by the elite is already in play. George Bush signed a bill implementing the North American Union.
President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it. And he took the step without approval from either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States.
I think one thing people who are dollar-based need to focus on is the Amero. That's the one thing that nobody's talking about that I think is going to have a big impact on everybody's life in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. The Amero is the proposed new currency for the North American community, which is being developed right now between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico to make a borderless community, much like the EU, and the dollar, Canadian dollar, U.S. dollar, and the Mexican peso replaced by the Amero.
You see, the domination of government by business is called fascism. And I'm kind of wondering how many people know what NAFTA is, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Because under Chapter 11 of the NAFTA agreement, NAFTA tribunals trump all U.S. law if it conflicts with either A, World Bank's International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, or B, UN Commission for International Trade Law. Now, that sounds scary enough, but when you understand what that reads, it also gives the power to violate the First and Second Amendment, which is saying, bye-bye to the Constitution. This will weaken national sovereignty and bankrupt the dollar we use now. After this happens, the Fed will call in all debts. When the debts cannot be repaid by the people, assets will be seized. And by this, I mean absolutely everything you own, including your property, your home, your vehicle, your furniture, and the clothes on your back. This plan is already in progress. And when it takes place, you will literally be owned by the Federal Reserve Bank. This is how Agenda 21 will be implemented. The seized land will be given back to nature, and the people will be placed in smart growth megacities. So what are we to do? There's an overabundance of information out there for anyone to see pertaining to why this situation seems so hopeless and out of our control. But in all honesty, there's even more information out there about how to protect ourselves. The only problem we face is that most people don't know how to apply this information to their own lives, and rarely anybody takes the time to spell it out for us. There are many great teachers out there. Teachers who have dedicated their lives to protecting the people who need protecting the most. The teacher has the most difficult role in our society because nobody likes attaining true knowledge. True knowledge encompasses all aspects of existence, good and bad. Most others do not. Hearing true knowledge upsets people because it implies that we were wrong at one point in our lives. And another character flaw is our desire to apply absolute truths to unstable foundations in our life. When we do so, we build a structure that we hope will define us best when we're reaching the end of our life on earth. So everything we think we are, everything we tell others we are, everything we base our life-changing decisions off of, is all depending on a foundation that could crumble at any moment. And because we've been told our entire lives that there are certain guidelines and mores we must follow to be a decent human being, we deny everything that may pose a threat to our unstable foundation. I maintain that the only true salvation from any oppression or enslavement is self-empowerment, knowledge, consciousness. This is true rebellion. Don't get caught up in the 87% of people who follow the leader. People who think that they are rebels because they denounce authority simply because it's the latest fashion. Don't march the streets claiming that you are the enlightened one because you read a book or saw a film that gave you a glimpse into an uncommon knowledge. Don't scream phrases into a megaphone that you borrowed from another person's research. And don't proclaim yourself an original thinker because you belong to a group that represents an unpopular belief. Those are all examples of the other side of the coin of groupthink, leading a false rebellion. False rebellion is dangerous because it gives the illusion that you are free and thinking for yourself. A true rebellion, a true revolution, begins when you quit following and start leading. And those who end up following you should be taught by you to quit following you and start leading. And the only way to lead successfully is by fully understanding your rights as a human being on this planet. We have very powerful tools on our side called the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. These documents state that no government can deprive us of our natural rights. So how is it happening? You must understand that the elite group controlling our government, our educational system, agriculture, and media are also in control of our free enterprise. Free enterprise is our economic system or our means of production, privately owned and operated for personal benefit. Free enterprise cannot legally be taxed unless it volunteers itself. The reason why income tax seems inescapable is because most every job on the planet requires you to sign a number of documents with fancy wording stating that you are agreeing to be a representative of a corporation or entity. What all of this means is simply that when you sign working papers, which are required by pretty much every employer that you apply to, you are waiving your rights as a natural person protected under the Constitution and agreeing to represent an artificial person that is not protected under the Constitution. It's difficult to avoid because if you do not sign the document waiving your rights, you won't get the job. So why does every employer voluntarily pay taxes, which leads to the requirement of those documents? Because without doing so, the business loses all state and federal benefits provided to private or commercial business. And furthermore, most people simply accept the mistruth that income tax is required by law without investigating it. When your name is presented on a document with the first letter of your first and last name capitalized, it represents capitis diminutia minima, which occurs when a man's family relations alone were changed. It's a minimal loss of rights. When your last name appears in capital letters, it represents capitis diminutia media, which occurs when a man loses his rights of citizenship but not his rights to liberty. This means you can be fined and penalized but not enslaved or imprisoned. But when your entire name is capitalized on any document, it represents capitis diminutia maxima, which states that a man's condition changes from freedom to bondage. All rights of citizenship and family rights are surrendered. This means you can be fined, imprisoned, and enslaved in any amount for any duration at the whim of the state's suggestion. But it is important to note that if you do not legally bind yourself to these documents stating that you waive your rights and represent a corporation, you do not have to attend any court.
There are two kinds of law on the earth, as I've said. One is called civil law, which is the law of the land, and one is called maritime admiralty, which is called the law of water. The maritime admiralty is banking law. So consequently, the corporation and government and people who want to control you, they create a second you, and that second you that they control, that they created, is all capital letters. Check it out. Anytime you get a bill, you get a lawsuit, you get a fine, a ticket, somebody sends you a bill from the Department of Water and Power, check it out on your driver's license, on your Social Security card, on your insurance cards. Your name will always be in all capital letters because only all capital letters can be dealt with by banks and government. You need to wake up and find out how this stuff really works. Because once you understand that you don't need to submit yourself as an American to a British commercial venture called courts. You're an American. You don't need to go to court. There's nobody. You only go to court because you agreed to go to court. When they send you a subpoena to court or summons to court, and they've sent you something, you look at it and say, hey, Jack, that's not me. That's in all capital letters. All capital letters is a corporation.
Those who are charged under these maritime admiralty courts usually don't understand that they are voluntarily being fined and imprisoned. When a judge calls your name and asks if you are that name, those who say yes are verbally agreeing to represent the artificial person that the name represents. In doing so, you are voluntarily waiving your rights under the Constitution. Your absolute rights as natural persons are the right to life, security, and property. And all of these are very important. Remember that you can never be deprived of these simple rights unless you are willingly waiving them. But you need to understand your rights if you want to be protected under them. When sustainable development is knocking down your door for the right to your property, you need to understand your inherent right to your property, which extends from the visible surface to the center of the earth. But please note that these steps are simply the beginning. They merely treat the symptoms instead of attacking the root. To understand fully how to protect yourself, you need to understand your origin. The true history of this planet has been stifled from the top down. Since the inception of monotheism and the ridicule as well as the outlaw in specific cultures of all pagan religions and practices, a lie has been forced upon all civilizations. You have to wonder why powerful empires were threatened enough by paganism to make the practice of such religions punishable by death. This threat didn't end during the Roman Empire. Take a look at how the founders of America, by mandate of Great Britain, wiped out Native American tribes indiscriminately. Great Britain has been known to show some of the most brutal forms of genocide in Africa, India, New Zealand, New Guinea, and many other locations which pagan tribes still existed. East Timor suffered one of the worst genocides in all of history, and was fueled by the United Nations and United States funding during the Carter administration. The last thing that the elite power wants is a sovereign group or tribe setting a positive example for others. Understand that most all of these problems are not by mistake, but by design.
Not for purposes of healing someone, but for purposes of controlling.
Manipulation.
And so he advised President Woodrow Wilson. I mean, we're talking, this is the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s. He was involved in government takeovers in South America, supporting companies like the fruit industry. And what we have to understand is, Bernays really fathered something we call scientific marketing. But the scientific marketing of those days, maybe a blood pressure cuff or, a pneumo, like a lie detection, that was designed to see how you responded to an ad or to a picture, in order to be able to present something to you that stimulated you. All right.
Then they went into the galvanic skin response.
Yeah, they used GSR. It's even further than that. A friend of mine in Mexico is using that technology right now, and of course it was developed here in America. But here's how far it goes. fMRI gives us the ability, functional magnetic resonance imaging, gives us the ability to watch the brain live time, so we can see how the brain responds to stimulus.
Amazing.
So by using all of these sciences, we've come to understand how to motivate people to do things.
The World Health Organization has just released its new list of the world's most depressed countries. The United States comes in at the third most overall depressed country after China and India. The U.S. comes in steadily at third for unipolar depressions, anxiety, drug and alcohol use.
Depression rates among